Hi everyone, it's Jerry. This is game 2 from the 2014 World Chess Championship match between Magnus Carlsen and Viswanathan. Going into this round, both players have a half a point each, and Carlsen with the white pieces in this one opened with e4, Anand replying e5, knight f3, knight c6, the Roy Lopez, Berlin defense with knight f6, and now d3, more reserved move here, certainly there to bolster the pawn on e4. More common is maybe castles, knight e4, but that's not a direction we go in. Instead, d3, bishop c5, castles, d6. With this last move, we can say pretty much that this bishop is a queenside specific piece. And with him now outside of the pawn chain, while he stands a bit more aggressively placed, he is also no longer going to be around to defend black's kingside dark squares if need be. Sometimes there is this idea of wanting to play g6 to defend that f5 square from a white queen knight, or even a white's king knight, but you could kind of rule that out because there's not an easy way for him to now return to this g7 square where he can remedy these f6 and h6 squares that would be vulnerable after a g6 move. I guess the short story here is that he's a queenside specific piece. He's not going to be around to defend the kingside, as easily at least. Anyhow, following up we have rook e1, castles, bishop takes knight. Only after this knight has been unpinned does white go forward with grabbing him. After the recapture, we have what imbalance? Okay, we have the bishop pair at the cost of a damaged pawn structure. And keep in mind this pawn is also isolated. Isolated pawns should be your cue to look at the squares in front of that pawn. These squares here could quite possibly be good homes for the enemy side. A white knight could maybe get to the a5 square or even the a4 square. We'll see that highlighted soon enough. First, it's h4. Without this light square bishop around, white will want to make certain pawns are around to restrict this unopposed light square bishop. Rook to e8. These rook moves bolster the center and vacate f8 for a minor piece. Knight d2, knight d7, knight c4. With knight c4, he's maybe heading for a5. This could be a little bit inconvenient to defend this pawn. This knight, by the way, is heading for f8. And he doesn't go there right away. On this next move, move 10, black runs with bishop to b6, which rules this move out altogether. What was quite interesting, while I was live streaming this, I pointed out that knight f8, this could be very awkward, I mentioned. But at the time, I was not looking at the computer evaluation. I had noted that this is a bit awkward. In fact, I had pointed out bishop d7 is just not a good defense of c6, but it is perfectly fine. Initially, I thought knight b7 and uh-oh, this is ugly. Tripled pawns, triple isolated pawns, not so good. But there is a very sharp tactic after knight b7. Can you see it? Bishop takes f2, king takes, and now queen b8. This knight will be won back. Knight here, queen b6. The knight is picked back up. Very sharp tactic, something to certainly be aware of. As soon as this rook had played to the e1 square. You could already be saying to yourself that f2 is a soft point, and we're seeing a way that can clearly be exploited in this variation here. If the knight is to one day arrive on a5 and then come into that b7 square, this is like just a bolt out of the blue here, grabbing on f2 and then queen b8 ideas. He's stuck and then could be picked up soon thereafter. Anyhow, we had this move ruled out altogether. Bishop b6 it was. And now a4. You don't want to take here. This remedies the black queenside structure and brings the rook right to life. White wants to first force black to move this pawn. and black does with a5. One other sharp continuation could have been bishop a6 at this point. Instead of the move played in the game a5, if bishop a6 was played, we could have a5, bishop c5, c3, looking for one day maybe d4 or even b4 to trap the bishop. There can follow d5, and on e takes d, not the immediate recapture, but rather this very wild and crazy e4 move, blasting open the center at a moment where black is A, ahead in development, and B still has this bishop pair that thrive in open positions, and open this position is. Breaking at c4, breaking at this d3 pawn, a lot of tension in the position. This could turn very complicated, but it didn't. It instead went with the more reserved approach, a5, stopping the pawn cold. Only at this moment does white take. Notice black is now not in a position to activate his rook with an a takes b capture. Black recaptures with the pawn. And now d4. Breaking in the center, and if we'll notice the pieces here, if we do a piece comparison, the rooks pretty much are the same, the queens are the same, the bishops are the same. Where are there differences in the position? Where there are differences is with regard to the central pawn structure, white having 2 pawns on the 4th rank, black having just 1, so there's a slight pull on the white side with regard to the pawn center, and a slight pull with regard to minor pieces. White has a 3rd rank minor piece, a more aggressive, we can say, minor piece, the one who's putting pressure on e5, and this one is more defensive. What does this really translate into? I'm not so sure how much. The computer evaluation is just about equal, but that's just a way you can try to assess a position, to do a piece comparison, or even a pawn structure comparison, as was pointed out with regard to the central structure. Queen c7 develops and reinforces that e5 point. And the rook to h3 is a very interesting move. Played with maybe just after 3 minutes here. Rook a3, a rook up and over, an interesting way to activate this guy. Initially I was thinking maybe one of these 2 squares, but we'll see that he has other intentions. After knight to f8, we have that central tension clarified. D takes e, black is there to recapture, so now there's no great imbalance with regard to the pawn structure in the center. Knight h4, and now this rook is ready to swing over here, and before you know it, white is looking for some attacking ideas. We have a knight looking to maybe jump into f5, the rook swinging over to g3, placing the pawn in a pin. The queen may be swinging out here to h5, and we have 4 attacking pieces. Queen, rook, bishop, and knight are there to try and attack the black king. But keep in mind that black has a very strong defensive knight, as well as a bishop that can rule out any knight that jumps into f5, and even this queen on c7, don't forget about her. After a move like f6, she's there to defend laterally, and maybe even if need be, the queen rook can play a role by pivoting on a7 to do similar, defending these 7th rank squares. Following up, we have rook d8. Black occupies the only open file. The fewer the open files, the more important they are to control. Black occupies that d file now. Queen h5 is in, and now f6, controlling these dark squares. This is a perfectly, this structure right here, this is a perfectly healthy kingside structure, complemented very well with the light square bishop. He'll be around to watch over these squares. The pawns have the dark squares here. Knight f5, and now bishop to e6. This is an important point in the game, certainly. About 6 minutes was spent on this next move, bishop to e6, not the only move. This knight is usually intolerable, but he could be worked around. Bishop e6 is a fine move. Another one to consider, and something that was pointed out after the game, I believe, is queen to f7 is maybe a slight improvement here to dislodge the queen, offer this queen exchange. If we do a queen comparison, earlier I was saying that the queen's offset, but things have changed certainly from this position. White queen now in black's position, a 5th rank queen versus a 2nd rank queen. Let's maybe offer this exchange. If the queens are off, the king is a little bit closer even to the center as things are simplifying. Black is perfectly fine in this position. We didn't have queen to f7. Instead, there was the decision to play bishop to e6. And just a couple moves later, what we'll soon see is that black decides to capture the knight. So I guess in some sense, there was a move wasted, right? Because he could take him out right away. And this was indeed a direction black could have gone in, to take on f5, and after the pawn recapture, to sort of box out the knight. While it's doubled, it is, again, influencing that guy on f8. He's not so easily activated, is what I'm getting at. There can follow rook d5 and doubling up on, again, this only open file. That's super important. We didn't have that, though. Bishop takes knight was not on. One other note is that if the queen is there to recapture, there can be rook d6 or even queen to f7. One of the ideas to plant this knight on e6, which is an absolutely perfect square for the knight. That is basically the main reason why we have this little regrouping. He is really, really well placed on the e6 square. He's coordinated very well with the pawn that would be right in front of him, this guy on e5. These squares are excellent jumping points, f4 and d4 for the knight. Okay, bishop takes knight was not on. Instead, bishop e6. The rook swings over. There's pressure against g7. Knight g6, and now h4. This is a curious point in the game. There's a sharp move here that we could have seen on board, and things would have been on fire very quickly. There's the sharp move, bishop to h6. Wow. If bishop h6 was played here, what would black do? Rook d7? Is this going to be a good defense? This could turn out to be quite scary. Let me point out first this variation, just grabbing pieces. What's wrong with just taking the bishop? Well, there's more material that can be invested with rook takes, h takes. White is down a full rook here. A full rook versus a pawn, or rook versus a pawn from this current position, but we wouldn't be finished just yet. King f8, there goes another pawn. There goes another. And here goes another. 4 pawns versus the rook, a crazy imbalanced position, and a king that is running for his life. White is the side who stands better. If we're staring at a computer evaluation, I don't know how much we could really lean on that in this position, but it's saying that white has about a pawn advantage. Would have been a wild, imbalanced position. We didn't have bishop to h6. That's not to say this capture would be needed. There is rook to d7. h4 could also follow, and this is still not on because of queen takes h6 with h5 ideas exploiting this pinned knight. It could have certainly got very crazy at this stage right here, move number 20 with bishop to h6. Instead of that, the move played in the game was h4. Bishop takes knight only at this stage, and so, again, in some sense, black has lost a move, right? Playing to e6, and only a couple of moves later going forward with finally removing that knight. And on top of that, notice after the recapture, white is kind of getting the move back, right? There's this recapture. Now that the knight is on g6, it's coming with tempo, so black has to react again. The knight plays into f4, and this is really where things are turning. White is the better side here, not by much, but there's this was the important point in the game. The decision at this stage, move 18 to go with bishop to e6, or maybe to capture, or queen to f7. Again, in the press conference after the game, this move was suggested, queen to f7, thinking that this would have been a better approach. Things are turning ever so slightly in white's advantage now at this point here after the capture and knight to f4. That knight is picked right up, and we have, similar to game one, an ending involving just the major pieces, just the queens and the rooks. An extra pair of rooks in this game compared to game one. So things will still remain quite tactical now that there are still more pieces on the board. These guys are both, there's a lot of pawns on this f-file. Both sides have doubled pawns, and he runs the risk of falling. This f4 pawn, he'll be tough to hang on to. Rook c3 is the follow-up, this move 23, keeping the rook active. During the live stream, I was pointing out, well, maybe you try to track that pawn down, but this move is anticipating what exactly, this rook c3 move? It's anticipating that one day if a rook gets to d2, well, the rook is there to defend. This, however, is not a good idea at this stage right here, because we would be winning as white in just a couple of moves. But this is a nice active and defensive post for the rook. Active in that it's putting pressure on c6, defensive in that it's defending against this any potential second rank pressure by a black rook on d2 one day. And by keeping pressure on c6, what else are you doing? How else can we describe that? We are restricting black in some way. We're restricting, in this case, the black queen. She's now tethered to the defense of that pawn for as long as he's on f6. That's what's prompting the c5 advance. The queen is now freed up, but she's restricted yet again as white improves one of his pieces, planting it in black's territory on e6, a very strong post, putting pressure on b6 and yet again restricting the black queen in some way. This is an excellent post also because of the support it has. If at any point it is challenged, well, maybe it needs to go nowhere. Even if it's captured at some stage, white, keep in mind, has the option of recapturing with the pawn, and, well, what do you know? We have a passed pawn just a couple steps away from queening. Following up, it's rook b8. Little change of the guard here, allowing the rook to now defend b6 instead of the queen. I'm not quite sure what would be better here. White is about, evaluation-wise, close to a pawn advantage. Rook a to b8 is there to defend. It's a bit tough. This rook can't go too far because of this pressure here, not until at least this pawn takes a step forward. But there's also that annoying feature where if black is playing h6, this is annoying. Even if one day, I'm not in any way saying this is best, but I just want to highlight something here. If this queen is ever captured, we have a pawn landing into this square here, and this is very inconvenient to the black side. For as long as he's around watching over these squares, back rank mates are available, or even the doubling of the heavy pieces in some way on the 7th rank. Black is reluctant to play h6 at this stage. Rook a to b8, rook c4, and queen to d7. This move here was clever. This is threatening to exchange queens. I didn't see that during the game. I was pointing out, well, maybe queen to f7 right now. But this is another way to try and get the queens off. Queen d7 is in, looking for queen to d1. King h2 is there, and this is preventing this queen d1 move right now. Notice just making a passing move. If b3 is played, or let me make a better move for white actually. Instead of b3, suppose rook takes f4. Well, now what can follow is queen d1 check, queen takes queen, rook takes queen, king h2, and now rook to d2, and this is a super active rook. And I believe this would be quite all right for Team Black here. On rook e7, there's even this move h5, stopping rook g4, trying to get at g7. One of these pawns will be won back. You could defend one, but you would drop another. Okay, this is a way to try and get the queens off, but with king h2 played, move king h2, not grabbing this pawn, with king h2 played, this move is no longer available because of this rook to e8 move. Deflection, rook takes rook, there goes your queen. Queen d1 is simply not good. What's played is rook to f8. Looking for maybe some 7th rank defense here. Another idea I thought is rook to e8, but do know that after white plays rook e4, there's a lot of pressure here. Are you going to take on e6? Again, if you do, this pawn is now passed, and you're not going to track him down so easily. And in fact, this pawn will be scooped up soon. White will be up a pawn and have a passed pawn that Black constantly needs to tend to. It's not a direction Black goes in. Rook f8 instead. Rook e4, looking to get to the 7th rank. Black defends this with rook b7. Queen e2, White is insisting on getting to the 7th rank. b5, b3. This is not necessarily the best move, but it's a fine consolidating type of move, preparing to meet b takes a with, it would seem, rook takes a to keep a fine structure on the queen side. A better attempt may very well have been rook e7 immediately. Queen d6 would have been an interesting reply, knowing full well that if rook takes rook, there is this sharp reply f3. That's a check, and there goes your queen. However, on queen d6, there can be the simple reply f3, meeting this threat and getting ready to capture the rook. There can follow rook takes rook, rook takes rook, and on b takes a, there's queen to e4, threatening to get to the 7th rank, and that would be game over. There's also queen c4 ideas, maybe in some lines. I think best here would be queen to b8 to stop this queen b7 move altogether, but you're dropping a pawn here, and this is just a super active rook. You can't even, this pawn is indirectly defended because of these moves here. Queen c4, king h8, queen f7. This is just crashing through. Rook here, there's rook there, and there's going to be mate happening soon. Okay, after b5, it was b3, b takes a, b takes a. So white is not focused so much on his queenside pawn structure. Rook takes a is perfectly fine. I believe after the game, Carlsen was pointing out he didn't like maybe going into these lines with rook b4, and if rook takes a, there's this f3 move hitting the queen, and the rook is on this pawn over here. It's very messy. I'm just glancing right now at the computer evaluation. It's saying it's completely equal, but yeah, that's not a direction we go in. He sensed that there was, maybe he was giving a little bit too much back to Black, and he was indeed correct with that. If we did in fact have rook b4 and rook to a5, he was right on with saying that f3 was pretty good. So it was instead of rook takes a4, pawn takes. So now these pawns are split. The main idea White has behind this is to just not pull the rook off of this e-file. These are very well-placed pieces. This is what we can call an Alekine's gun, having the two rooks as the leaders and the queen there to back them up. One other thing that I forgot to mention is that White has simply ignored trying to scoop up this pawn. White is seeing this as completely irrelevant to the position. Carlsen is viewing this as the rook's activity along the e-file as being more important than material. This pawn is going nowhere. You could maybe even one day see the king as the one who scoops up that pawn. That would most likely be the case if the queens are off the board. But Again, not even wasting time to grab this pawn here is what I'm getting at. Instead, focusing on the activity of the pieces on the open file, on these central files, the E file in this case. After B takes A, it was A takes B. Rook B4. Black is slowly getting back into the game. There was, I believe, a moment or two where it was close to maybe a +2 advantage, but this Rook B4 move, and now things are maybe slightly turning a little bit for the black side, eliminating this active Rook on E4. We have as a follow-up Rook E7. Queen D6 is threatening F3 with a discovered check on the king, and then there goes the queen. Queen F3 defends that. Rook takes rook, queen takes rook. F3 is played with check, G3, and now H5. At this stage right here, it's about a +1 advantage for white. White is the side, or maybe even a pawn and a half advantage, giving it some time here to think. White is, without question, still trying to convert this into a win, push for a win here, the better side, without question. This pawn could be scooped up soon. This rook is already on the 7th rank. We do a rook comparison. We see who has the better rook and even the better queen in this position, having a central queen or a more central queen. This move H5, however, is a serious blunder. A better move in this position is queen to D2, putting pressure on F2. And, well, we didn't have that. We had something that is certainly going to have Anand having some nightmares here, I believe. Queen B7. This was, as it turns out, a very serious blunder. Not quite sure how else to explain it. I was a bit speechless during the live stream when I saw this move. I thought to myself, what am I missing? And, well, I wasn't missing anything. But, Black ended up missing this move, queen to B7. This is game over. Black resigned after this last move, H5. When queen B7 was played, Anand resigns. He simply overlooked that white is now going to be crashing through on G7. The valuation is like +15. It's game over. There's no defense. You have to give up your queen. That's just a very abrupt end. Again, I was speechless. I probably hear my voice right now. I'm still speechless at this type of result for it to end so quickly like that. But yeah, the only thing I could come up with is that H5 was maybe aimed at some point preventing white from making use of the G5 square, not only a flight square for the king, but to watch over G4. But maybe with so much attention earlier being on this E file and just the file activity that white had, the pieces stacked on the E file, this is one of the first moments that white is in fact threatening to do something now along a rank, and it was apparently a complete blind spot for Anand. Again, after queen to B7, it is at this point that black resigned, and with that we have the first decisive result of the 2014 World Chess Championship match, pushing it now, Carlsen having 1.5 points to a half a point. The following day is a rest day. We'll see what happens in Game 3, and as usual, I will be live streaming it and looking forward to it, and I hope you are too. So that's all for now. I hope you got something out of this video. Take care. Bye.